I am Maya. I am 45 years old and the founder of a highly successful real estate investment fund based in Atlanta. For 2 decades, I poured my absolute heart and soul into building a pristine life for my family. I raised a brilliant son. I supported a highly demanding husband. And I grew a massive business empire from the ground up. But loyalty means absolutely nothing to a man driven by greed and pure ego. Last Saturday, at my son's lavish college graduation party, my husband attempted to publicly destroy me. He stood before hundreds of Atlanta's most influential people and announced he was divorcing me to replace me with his mistress. He thought he was delivering a fatal blow to my dignity. He had no idea I had already dismantled his entire financial existence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain while holding the ultimate winning hand. Growing up with nothing taught me exactly how to fight for everything I have. By the time I met Marcus, I had already closed my first major commercial real estate deal. Marcus was a smooth-talking investment banking director. He was 48, charismatic, and ruthlessly ambitious. When we married, he brought a newborn baby boy into our union. He claimed the mother was a brief, random fling who had tragically passed away. Since a medical condition made it impossible for me to carry children of my own, I took little Malik into my arms and loved him as fiercely as any biological mother possibly could. I was his mother in every single way that mattered. I bandaged his scraped knees. I stayed up all night helping him with complex science projects. I cheered the absolute loudest at every single sporting event. And last weekend, we were celebrating his ultimate achievement. Malik had just graduated as the valedictorian of the top finance program at his university. He was 20 years old and completely ready to conquer the corporate world. To celebrate this massive milestone, I transformed the sprawling backyard of our Buckhead estate into a breathtaking event venue. White silk tents billowed softly in the warm Georgia breeze. Crystal chandeliers hung from the massive oak trees, casting a warm golden glow over the perfectly manicured lawn. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated constantly with silver trays of champagne and gourmet appetizers. The guest list included the absolute elite of Atlanta high society. We had federal judges, real estate moguls, powerful bank executives, and prominent politicians mingling by the glowing infinity pool. It was a picture of absolute perfection. I wore a custom emerald green gown, holding a glass of vintage champagne, and feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. My son was a brilliant young man, and my business was thriving globally. I felt completely invincible. But beneath the surface of this flawless evening, a toxic poison was ready to boil over and ruin everything. Marcus had been acting increasingly arrogant all evening long. He paraded around the stone patio, accepting lavish congratulations from his wealthy colleagues, as if Malik's academic brilliance was solely a product of his own superior genetics. He completely ignored the countless hours I spent tutoring Malik and guiding his complicated college applications. I watched Marcus step onto the raised stone platform near the edge of the pool. He grabbed a microphone from the live jazz band that had been playing softly in the background. He tapped his crystal champagne flute with a heavy silver spoon. The sharp chiming sound cut right through the chatter, and the hundreds of guests immediately turned their attention toward him. A hush fell over the entire crowd. People smiled expectantly, waiting for the proud father to deliver a heartwarming toast to his highly successful son. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate," Malik Marcus began, his voice booming loudly over the premium outdoor speakers. "This young man has exceeded every single expectation. He is a top-tier graduate heading straight to the peak of the financial world. As his father, my chest could not be puffing out any further tonight." The wealthy crowd offered a warm, enthusiastic round of applause. I beamed at Malik, who was standing a few feet away, looking incredibly handsome in his tailored dark suit. I waited patiently for Marcus to acknowledge me. I waited for the customary public thank you to the woman who had raised this incredible boy while he worked late nights at the bank. But the charming smile on Marcus's face suddenly shifted. His expression hardened into a cold, calculating sneer. He did not look at Malik anymore. He locked his dark eyes directly onto me from across the patio. Of course, none of this would have been possible without Maya, Marcus said. But his tone was entirely wrong. His voice was dripping with a thick, venomous sarcasm that made the fine hairs on my arms stand straight up. The crowd sensed the shift immediately. The joyful, celebratory atmosphere evaporated in a second, replacing it with a thick, uncomfortable tension. Maya, I want to formally thank you tonight. Thank you for spending the last 20 years acting as my unpaid nanny. A loud collective gasp ripped through the elegant crowd. People shifted uncomfortably on their feet, exchanging horrified and deeply confused glances. Some guests actually took a step back in sheer shock. But Marcus gripped the microphone tighter, thoroughly enjoying the horrific shock value of his words. He paced slowly across the stone steps, projecting his voice so every single person on the sprawling property could hear him with perfect clarity. You see, everyone, Maya could never give me a biological heir. She is completely barren. She is entirely unable to fulfill the most basic fundamental function of being a real wife. So when my true love gave birth to my son Maya, conveniently stepped in to do the heavy lifting for us. I think 20 years of free babysitting is quite enough, do not you all agree? I stood completely frozen in place. The delicate champagne glass in my hand felt incredibly heavy. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. This man who had slept beside me for 2 long decades was using my deepest private medical trauma to humiliate me in front of my professional peers, my corporate colleagues, and my closest friends. The cruelty was meticulously designed to break my spirit right there in front of the entire world. Marcus laughed, a harsh, echoing sound that bounced off the brick walls of our massive mansion. I am officially announcing our divorce tonight, Maya. Right here and right now. I am taking back this entire Buckhead estate. I am taking back the life I built from scratch. And I am bringing the real biological mother of my child back to her rightful place in this family. He extended his free hand gracefully toward the stunned, silent crowd. Come up here, my darling. Take your rightful place. The sea of horrified faces parted instantly like a wave. Out of the crowd stepped a woman I knew incredibly well. It was Sarah. She was a 40-year-old woman, and she was married to Marcus's own younger brother, Jamal. For years, she had played the role of the sweet, supportive sister-in-law. But right now, she wore a triumphant, sickeningly smug smirk on her face. She dropped her own husband's arm, completely ignoring the look of absolute shock and sheer devastation tearing across Jamal's face. Sarah walked toward Marcus with total, arrogant confidence. She stepped gracefully onto the stage, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist and turning to face the crowd with a beaming smile of pure victory. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Even the crickets in the ancient oak trees seemed to stop their humming. Jamal stood frozen near the glowing ice sculpture, his premium cocktail slipping from his hand and shattering against the stone patio. The sound of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot across the lawn. He stared at his wife Sarah, his mouth opening and closing without a single word forming. He had provided her with a life of extreme luxury, blindly believing her lies and devotion for over a decade. Now she did not even offer him a passing glance of apology or regret. Sarah leaned heavily against Marcus, interlacing her fingers with his. She wore a stunning crimson silk dress that clung tightly to her frame, a body she had spent years obsessing over, while I was busy building my real estate fund and actually raising her abandoned child. The sheer audacity of her standing on my patio in my home, claiming my life, was staggering. She released Marcus slightly and took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward the edge of the raised platform. I stood just below her, maintaining my posture, keeping my spine straight and my chin held high. I refused to give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Sarah bent slightly at the waist, bringing her face closer to mine. Her eyes were wide and manic, filled with the toxic thrill of a woman who genuinely believed she had just won the ultimate prize. Marcus stepped up right behind her, wrapping his arm around her bare shoulder. In his arrogant triumph, he completely forgot he was still gripping the live microphone tightly in his other hand, holding it right near Sarah's face. Sarah leaned in, wearing a vicious, predatory smile. She intended her words to be a devastating private whisper meant only to break my heart and shatter my confidence. Instead, her sharp voice was projected flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing across the entire Buckhead estate. "Did you really think a real estate mogul like you could buy blood ties, Maya?" she sneered, her voice dripping with absolute malice. "Did you honestly believe all your money and your late nights doing homework with him would make him yours? You were nothing but a placeholder." The crowd gasped collectively again, but Sarah was too wrapped up in her own twisted victory to realize her words were booming over the premium outdoor speakers. She kept going, her tone growing even more venomous. "Thank you so much for your service, by the way. I really do appreciate you staying up all night nursing him through those endless fevers during his first 5 years. I desperately needed to travel through Europe to keep my figure and enjoy my youth. You were the perfect little nanny. But playtime is over now, Maya. I want my son back. I want my man back. Now hand over the lady of the house position to me." The sheer cruelty of her words hung heavily in the humid Georgia air. The guests were absolutely paralyzed. Federal judges, banking executives, and prominent politicians stood with their mouths wide open, staring at the spectacle unfolding on the stage. Sarah had just openly admitted to abandoning her newborn baby so she could party across Europe, leaving me to wipe away his tears, soothe his nightmares, and build him into the remarkable young man standing here tonight. I let my eyes wander briefly over the crowd. I saw absolute disgust on the faces of my professional peers. Marcus and Sarah thought they were humiliating me, but they were actively destroying their own reputations in front of Atlanta's most powerful people. Marcus had just revealed himself as a man who would sleep with his own brother's wife and discard his devoted spouse. Sarah had just branded herself as a shallow, heartless woman who discarded her infant child for a European vacation. Jamal suddenly turned and pushed his way blindly through the thick crowd, disappearing into the massive house. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for him. He was nothing but collateral damage in their narcissistic game. Sarah finally seemed to realize that every single person on the lawn had heard her horrific confession. She glanced at the microphone in Marcus's hand, her crimson lips parting in a brief moment of sudden panic. But Marcus just squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, puffing his chest out further. He was completely blinded by his own massive ego, believing that his wealth and his power at the bank would shield him from the intense social fallout. He believed that Atlanta society would simply accept his new arrangement because he was Marcus, the untouchable investment director. All eyes slowly shifted from the stage down to me. The heavy, uncomfortable silence was completely suffocating. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They expected me to scream. They expected me to throw my drink in Sarah's face. They expected me to collapse onto the stone patio in a puddle of tears, begging Marcus to reconsider. That is exactly what Marcus wanted. He wanted to break me so completely that I would be too devastated to fight him for the assets during the upcoming divorce. But I am not a fragile woman who breaks under pressure. I negotiate multi-million-dollar commercial acquisitions with some of the most ruthless developers in the country. I thrive in high-stress environments. I had spent the last 6 months planning for this exact moment, preparing a counterstrike so lethal it would wipe Marcus completely off the financial map. I looked directly into Sarah's triumphant eyes. I looked at Marcus's arrogant smirk. Then I slowly raised my crystal glass of vintage champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the crisp, cold taste as it slid down my throat. I lowered the glass and allowed a cool, genuine smile to spread across my face. It was not a smile of defeat or hysteria. It was the calm, absolute certainty of a predator who has already locked the cage doors. I turned my head slightly, looking past the stage to where my son stood. Malik had watched the entire horrific display in total silence. His face was a mask of cold professionalism, perfectly mirroring my own. We locked eyes across the crowded patio. I gave him a single subtle nod. Malik caught my signal perfectly. Without a single trace of hesitation, he set his glass down on a passing waiter's silver tray. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit and began walking purposefully toward the raised stone patio. The crowd parted for him just as they had done for Sarah moments earlier, but the energy radiating from my son was entirely different. He did not look like a boy caught in the middle of a messy family drama. He looked like a seasoned executive stepping into a hostile boardroom. Marcus puffed out his chest, even further completely misreading the situation. He beamed with arrogant pride and extended his free arm, gesturing grandly toward his approaching son. He genuinely believed this was his ultimate victory lap. Beside him, Sarah actually squeezed her eyes shut and forced out a few crocodile tears. She held her arms wide open, ready to receive the boy she had abandoned 2 decades ago. She was entirely prepared for her emotional cinematic reunion in front of Atlanta high society. But Malik completely bypassed Sarah. He did not even break his stride or offer her a passing glance as he walked right past her outstretched arms. The fake, tearful smile on her face froze instantly, transforming into a mask of pure, awkward confusion. Malik stepped directly up to Marcus. He reached out and firmly gripped the microphone. For a split second, Marcus resisted, clearly wanting to retain control of the moment. But Malik stared his father down with a cold, deadpan expression that I had taught him to use during tough negotiations. Marcus swallowed hard and slowly released his grip, yielding the floor. Malik turned to face the hundreds of wealthy guests. He did not look embarrassed or ashamed. His posture was impeccable, and his voice was completely steady, echoing with absolute authority across the silent lawn. "Thank you, Marcus, for the sudden public biology lesson today." Malik began, his tone dangerously calm. "I am sure everyone here is absolutely thrilled to know the exact origin of my DNA. It is always nice to clear up the paperwork. But let us get one fundamental fact straight before we continue this little show." Malik raised his hand and pointed directly at me through the sea of guests. The crowd turned, following his gesture. "That woman standing right there is my mother," Malik stated, his voice ringing with fierce, unwavering loyalty. "She is the woman who raised me. She is the woman who taught me how to read, how to fight, and how to win. She is the only mother I have ever known, and she is the absolute only mother I will ever acknowledge." A low murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. I felt a massive surge of pride swell in my chest. Sarah dropped her empty arms to her sides, her face flushing a deep, angry shade of crimson. She looked frantically at Marcus for support, but Marcus was too busy staring at Malik with a look of growing panic. His perfect public spectacle was rapidly unraveling. Now Malik continued, turning his attention back to the man shrinking beside him. "Regarding your grand announcement about a divorce, you boldly claimed you are taking back this estate. You said you are taking back the life you built and erasing my mother from your financial future. That is a truly fascinating legal strategy, but I think you might have skipped the fine print in the venture capital agreement we signed last month." The silence on the patio became so absolute you could hear the water cascading over the edge of the infinity pool. The federal judges and banking executives in the crowd suddenly leaned forward, their predatory business instincts fully activated. They knew exactly what it looked like when a powerful man was about to be financially slaughtered. "Did you forget Clause 4? Marcus?" Malik asked, tilting his head with a mock expression of innocent curiosity. "The specific clause where you use this exact Buckhead estate and your entire personal stock portfolio as collateral to secure the bridge loan for my new tech firm. You were so desperate to take the public credit for funding my company that you signed the personal guarantees without bothering to have your own legal team review the ownership structure." Marcus took a physical step backward. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. The arrogant sneer had been completely wiped from his face, replaced by the dawning terror of a man stepping onto a landmine. "You see," Malik explained, his voice echoing clearly over the manicured lawns. "My tech company is not an independent startup. It is a wholly owned subsidiary of Maya's real estate investment fund, which means my mother's corporation holds the exclusive rights to your massive debt. You leveraged everything you own to fund me. And my mother owns everything I just built. You do not own this house anymore, Marcus. She does." And as of yesterday morning, when you missed your first highly customized balloon payment, she technically owns your entire stock portfolio, too. The collective gasp from the crowd was significantly louder this time. It was the sound of high society witnessing a brutal, flawless execution. Sarah let out a sharp, pathetic cry of disbelief, covering her mouth with her hands. She had abandoned her own husband to align herself with a wealthy titan, only to realize she had just hitched herself to a completely bankrupt man. Marcus's face turned an unhealthy shade of pale gray. He looked frantically between Malik, the murmuring crowd of his peers, and finally to me. His eyes were wide with sheer, absolute terror. He was completely ruined. His money, his home, his reputation, and his ultimate prize were all entirely gone in the span of 3 minutes. I stood holding my crystal glass, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. I looked directly into Marcus's panicked eyes and let my smile widen just a fraction. He thought he was the predator. He thought he was hunting me for sport to feed his endless ego. He had absolutely no idea that I had cast this financial net 6 months ago, waiting patiently in the dark for him to walk right into his own destruction. 6 months earlier. The camera closely tracks Maya as she steps out of the private executive elevator and moves swiftly down the sleek, glass-walled corridor of her real estate investment firm. Her heels click rhythmically against the polished marble floor, echoing the rapid calculating beat of her own racing heart. She clutches a sleek silver tablet tightly in her right hand, her knuckles turning slightly white from the force of her grip. The screen displays a highly restricted financial ledger, highlighting a glaring, undeniable discrepancy that she had uncovered just 10 minutes prior. Exactly $50,000 had completely vanished from a joint discretionary fund she managed with her husband Marcus. Maya does not run, but her pace is relentless and predatory. She is a woman who deals in multi-million-dollar acquisitions, zoning laws, and ruthless corporate takeovers. She knows the exact scent of financial deception, and this particular transaction stinks of a sloppy, arrogant cover-up. The funds had been hastily wired through a dummy vendor account, categorized under vague consulting fees, before disappearing entirely into an untraceable offshore routing number. Marcus was the only other person with the administrative clearance to authorize that specific type of rapid transfer without triggering an automatic internal audit. She bypasses his administrative assistant without a single word of greeting and pushes open the heavy oak doors to Marcus's corner office. The room smells of expensive leather and aged scotch. Marcus is standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Atlanta skyline with a crystal glass in his hand. He does not flinch when the heavy doors swing shut behind her. He simply takes a slow sip of his drink and turns around wearing a mask of mild, patronizing annoyance. "What is the meaning of this unauthorized withdrawal?" Maya asks, her voice perfectly level, devoid of any hysterical emotion. She steps forward and places the tablet flat on his pristine mahogany desk, tapping the glowing red figures on the screen. $50,000 was wired out of our joint holding account at 2 in the morning, Marcus. The vendor does not exist. The routing number is masked. I want an explanation right now. Marcus sighs heavily, rolling his eyes as if he is dealing with an unruly child instead of his brilliant business partner. He sets his glass down and leans against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms over his tailored suit. He looks at the tablet for merely a second before looking back up at her with a condescending smirk. "It is a basic business expense, Maya," he says, his tone dripping with fake patience. "I had to secure a highly sensitive consulting favor from a key partner to facilitate that new commercial zoning permit we discussed last month. The transaction required absolute discretion. You know how these high-level political games are played in this city. You are completely overreacting. I personally handle all the zoning permits for my own real estate fund," Maya counters, stepping closer to him so he can see the absolute certainty in her dark eyes. "I do not pay ghost vendors $50,000 in the middle of the night for favors. That money was drained from a mutual account meant for property acquisitions, not your personal slush fund. I want the exact name of the consultant, and I want the receipts by the end of the day." Marcus drops the facade of the patient husband. His face hardens, his jaw clenching as his massive ego flares up defensively. He hates being questioned, and he absolutely despises being cornered by a woman who is significantly smarter than he is. He takes a step forward, invading her personal space, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate her. "You are losing your mind, Maya," he snarls, his voice dropping into a vicious, cruel register. "You sit in your office all day staring at spreadsheets and banking ledgers because you have absolutely nothing else going on inside that cold, calculating body of yours. This is nothing but the paranoia of a barren woman. You obsess over every single penny in our accounts because you know you are broken inside. You are just a hollow machine playing house with my brother's abandoned kid. Do not ever walk into my office and interrogate me about my business ever again." The insult is designed to be a fatal blow to her psyche. Marcus deliberately weaponizes her painful history of infertility, attempting to crush her confidence and force her into a submissive, tearful retreat. He expects her to crumble, to break down in tears, and flee the office in absolute devastation. But Maya does not cry. She does not scream. She simply stares at him, absorbing the sheer magnitude of his cruelty. In that singular defining moment, the last remaining thread of her affection for this man snaps completely. She realizes with crystal clarity that her husband is not just a liar, but a ruthless enemy. She picks up her tablet, turns on her heel, and walks out of the office in total silence. She does not need him to confess. Her analytical mind has already begun running the variables, and she knows exactly how to find the truth herself. Later that exact same evening, the tense atmosphere of the office is replaced by the glittering, opulent ambiance of an elite charity art auction. The event is held at one of Buckhead's most prestigious contemporary galleries. Soft classical music drifts through the massive open space, mingling with the low hum of wealthy patrons discussing investments and summer homes. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulate through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and imported caviar. Maya stands near a massive abstract painting, projecting an aura of total, unbothered elegance. She wears a sleek, tailored emerald gown, holding a glass of sparkling water, chatting amiably with a group of banking executives. She is completely in her element, commanding the room with her usual effortless grace. Then the crowd parts slightly, and Sarah arrives. Sarah walks into the gallery, acting as if she owns the entire building. She is draped on the arm of her husband Jamal, but her eyes are constantly scanning the room looking for someone else. She wears a plunging black velvet gown that leaves her shoulders and neck completely bare, serving as the perfect canvas for the blinding piece of jewelry resting against her collarbone. Maya spots the jewelry instantly. Her sharp eyes lock onto the massive, intricate diamond necklace, sparkling under the gallery's recessed lighting. Her mind instantly calculates the clarity, the cut, and the carat weight of the stones. It is a highly exclusive custom piece from a boutique jeweler in Paris. The retail value of that specific necklace is exactly $50,000. The missing money from the morning ledger suddenly manifests right in front of her, hanging around the neck of her brother-in-law's wife. The puzzle pieces snap together with terrifying precision. Marcus had not paid a political consultant. He had drained their joint account to buy a lavish, breathtaking gift for his secret mistress. Sarah spots Maya standing near the abstract painting. A wicked, knowing smile spreads across Sarah's face. She leaves Jamal talking to a city councilman and strides directly toward Maya, holding a half-full glass of champagne. Sarah wants a confrontation. She is drunk on the thrill of the affair and desperate to flaunt her stolen victory right in Maya's face. Maya remains perfectly still, allowing Sarah to approach. She watches the diamonds catch the light with every step Sarah takes. Sarah stops just inches away from Maya, invading her personal space with an overwhelming cloud of heavy designer perfume. Sarah lifts her free hand and deliberately caresses the heavy diamond necklace, drawing maximum attention to the glittering stones. She looks Maya up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Marcus really knows how to pick gifts for his partners, doesn't he?" "Maya," Sarah sneers, keeping her voice low enough to avoid drawing a crowd, but loud enough to ensure every single word cuts deep. The diamonds flash as she traces the chain with her manicured fingernail. "He has such exquisite taste. But then again, this kind of high-end jewelry really only suits women who actually birth outstanding heirs." It is completely wasted on soulless money printing machines who just obsess over bank accounts all day. Sarah takes a slow, triumphant sip of her champagne, leaving a distinct dark red lipstick stain on the rim of the crystal glass. She is practically vibrating with malicious joy, waiting for Maya to snap to cause a massive scene and embarrass herself in front of Atlanta's elite. But Maya simply looks at the necklace and then looks directly into Sarah's mocking eyes. She does not utter a single word of defense. She does not let a single fraction of anger show on her perfectly composed face. She simply smiles a cold, terrifying smile that causes Sarah's confident smirk to falter for just a fraction of a second. Feeling suddenly unnerved by Maya's complete lack of a reaction, Sarah scoffs, rolls her eyes, and sets her half-empty champagne glass down on a nearby cocktail table. She turns her back on Maya and struts away, disappearing back into the thick crowd of wealthy donors to find Jamal. Maya waits exactly 5 seconds, ensuring no one is watching her directly. She moves smoothly toward the small cocktail table. She pulls a clean, sterile plastic Ziploc bag from her designer clutch. With swift, practiced precision, she picks up the crystal glass, holding it carefully by the stem to preserve the dark red lipstick stain on the rim. She drops the glass directly into the plastic bag, seals it tight, and slips it back into her purse. She does not need to argue with Sarah. She just secured the exact DNA sample she needs to completely destroy them both. The sterile fluorescent lights of Tariq's downtown investigative office buzzed with a low mechanical hum. Tariq was a former forensic accountant turned private investigator, and he did not deal in rumors or speculation. He dealt strictly in irrefutable data. I sat across his battered steel desk, watching him slide a thick, unmarked manila folder toward me. The Ziploc bag containing Sarah's lipstick-stained crystal glass was long gone, already processed by a discreet private lab Tariq kept on retainer. I opened the folder. The first page was a comprehensive breakdown of Sarah's hidden financial landscape. Tariq had methodically traced the missing $50,000 from my joint real estate fund. The routing numbers were a tangled web of offshore shell companies, but Tariq had successfully mapped every single digital footprint. The money had bounced from a Cayman Islands holding account directly to a boutique Parisian jeweler. More damning were the secondary ledgers. Marcus had been quietly funding Sarah's extravagant lifestyle for over a decade. He had covered her secret luxury car leases, her private spa retreats, and the premium credit cards she kept hidden from my brother-in-law, Jamal. Marcus was essentially paying a massive ongoing retainer for his brother's wife. But the financial betrayal was absolutely nothing compared to the second document in the folder. I turned the page and stared at the official laboratory letterhead. The bold black text detailed a comparative genetic analysis between the DNA extracted from Sarah's champagne glass and a medical profile I had legally obtained from Malik's routine health screening. I read the final percentage printed at the bottom of the page. 99.9% probability of maternity. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I gripped the edges of the paper so tightly the crisp parchment threatened to tear. Malik, the brilliant, compassionate young man I had raised from a sickly infant, was not the product of a tragic anonymous encounter. He was the direct biological result of an ongoing illicit affair between my husband and his own brother's wife. Marcus had brought his illegitimate child into my home, played the role of a noble savior, taking in a supposedly abandoned baby, and forced me to act as the unpaid nanny. While I spent sleepless nights nursing Malik through childhood fevers, Sarah was busy spending Marcus's stolen money on European vacations and diamond necklaces. The sheer magnitude of their deception was staggering. They had weaponized my maternal love and turned my own home into a monument to their twisted affair. I closed the folder and slid it securely into my leather briefcase. I did not shed a single tear. Tears were a luxury for victims, and I was officially no longer a victim. I thanked Tariq, paid his exorbitant invoice in cash, and walked out into the glaring Atlanta sunlight with a mind functioning like a supercomputer. That evening, the sprawling Buckhead estate was wrapped in a suffocating, deceptive quiet. I found Marcus exactly where I expected him to be. He was lounging behind his massive mahogany desk in his home office, pouring himself a generous measure of 20-year-old single malt scotch. He looked entirely too comfortable, a man who believed his arrogant lies were completely impenetrable. I walked into the room carrying a stack of standard legal documents. I maintained a perfectly neutral expression, masking the lethal knowledge I now possessed. I needed to test the absolute limits of his depravity. I needed to hear exactly how far he was willing to take this lie. Marcus, I need to ask you a serious question about Malik, I said, keeping my tone appropriately soft and maternal. We are finalizing the insurance paperwork for his new tech startup. The underwriters are requiring a comprehensive family medical history. I know it is a sensitive subject, but I need some specific details about his biological mother's past health records. It is purely for the corporate health policy. Marcus stopped pouring his scotch. His entire body went rigid. The glass clinked sharply against the crystal decanter. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and his handsome face instantly twisted into a mask of vicious defensive rage. He hated being reminded of the false narrative he had constructed because it required him to maintain a lie he thought he had buried decades ago. He slammed the heavy decanter down onto the wooden desk. "What is wrong with you now?" he snarled, his voice echoing off the high coffered ceilings. "Why are you bringing this up again? I have told you 1,000 times, Maya. I do not have her medical records." I maintained my calm, persistent posture. Marcus, the insurance company, needs to know if there is a history of heart disease or genetic conditions. It is a standard procedure. Surely you remember something about her background. Marcus took 2 aggressive steps around the desk, invading my personal space. The scent of expensive scotch and unbridled arrogance radiated from him. He looked down at me with eyes full of absolute contempt, entirely willing to brutally degrade the woman he claimed to have loved in order to protect his vile secret. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" he shouted, his face turning a dark, angry red. "I told you exactly who she was. His mother was a filthy, worthless junkie. She was a street-walking addict who died of a massive heroin overdose 20 years ago in a dirty motel room. She had no medical history because she had no life worth recording. She was garbage, Maya, absolute garbage." He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "Are you actually jealous of a dead woman? Are you so deeply insecure about your own pathetic barren body that you need to drag a rotting corpse into my office just to start a fight? Drop the subject immediately. Malik is my son, and you will never mention that worthless junkie in this house ever again." The sheer venom in his voice was chilling. He delivered the lie with such practiced, flawless conviction. He stood there proudly degrading the mother of his child, calling her a filthy streetwalker, while fully knowing that very same woman was currently married to his brother, wearing $50,000 of his stolen money around her neck. His capacity for deception was not just immoral, it was borderline sociopathic. I did not back away from his towering, aggressive stance. I simply looked at him, absorbing every single hateful word. I let the silence stretch between us, allowing his cruel voice to completely fill the room. I did not need to defend myself. I did not need to scream or argue or present the manila folder currently locked in my safe. The trap had already been sprung. My eyes slowly drifted away from Marcus's furious face. I looked past his broad shoulders straight toward the heavy oak doors of the home office. The door was not completely shut. It was cracked open exactly 3 inches. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, perfectly framed in that narrow opening, was Malik. My son stood absolutely paralyzed. His hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. The documents for his tech startup were crushed completely flat in his right grip. He had come downstairs to get the paperwork signed. Instead, he had stood in the shadows and listened to every single word. He had just heard the man he idolized, the father. He looked up to brutally describe his biological mother as a worthless street-walking junkie who died in a filthy motel. Malik's eyes met mine through the narrow gap in the door. I saw the exact moment the boy he used to be died. There were no tears in his eyes. There was no childish shock or trembling sorrow. His gaze was incredibly dark, cold, and frighteningly empty. He was looking at Marcus not as a father but as a complete stranger. Malik did not barge into the room. He did not yell or demand the truth. He possessed my analytical mind and my terrifying patience. He simply took one slow, silent step backward, retreating into the deep shadows of the hallway. He turned and disappeared into the house, taking his shattered reality and his newfound cold fury with him. Marcus was completely oblivious. He turned his back to me, picking up his scotch glass and taking a large, triumphant swallow, believing he had successfully intimidated me into silence. He thought he had just won another domestic battle. He had no idea that he had just handed me the ultimate weapon. He had completely severed the bond with his only son and willingly handed Malik's absolute loyalty directly to me. The destruction of Marcus's empire was no longer just a financial necessity. It was now a blood debt. The heavy oak door of Marcus's office clicked shut behind me, sealing him inside his own delusional reality. The opulent hallway of our Buckhead estate stretched out before me, bathed in the muted glow of crystal sconces. My posture remained flawlessly rigid, my breathing steady and measured. I did not rush. I walked with the deliberate, calculated pace of a woman who had just identified the exact structural weaknesses of an enemy fortress. I knew exactly where Malik had retreated. I found him in his private study, a sleek, minimalist room overlooking the manicured back gardens. The space was completely dark, save for the harsh blue light radiating from his dual computer monitors. Malik was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his broad shoulders tense, his silhouette completely rigid against the glass. On the center of his pristine glass desk sat the venture capital contracts for his new tech startup. The thick stack of premium paper was violently crushed, the pages wrinkled and distorted by his furious grip. I did not knock and I did not offer a soft maternal greeting. We were far past the point of gentle coddling. I walked into the room, locked the door behind me, and set my leather briefcase flat on the glass surface. The sharp sound caused Malik to turn around. His face was a canvas of pure frozen shock, violently warring with a deep, agonizing betrayal. The man he had called his father for 2 decades had just incinerated his entire origin story, turning his biological mother into a crude, filthy punchline. "You heard him?" I stated, my voice completely devoid of pity or hesitation. It was a statement of absolute fact, not a question. Malik swallowed hard, his jaw muscle feathering. "I heard everything." He replied, his voice dangerously soft. "He said she was a junkie. He said she was garbage who died in a motel room." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick manila folder Tariq had handed me just hours earlier. I placed it directly next to his ruined startup contracts. I did not offer him a tearful embrace. I did not pull him into my arms and tell him everything would be all right. We were not that kind of family. Our bond was forged in shared intellect, mutual respect, and an unwavering, absolute loyalty. I respected him too much to protect him from the brutal truth. "If you are going to go to war, you need the complete data set," I told him, tapping the cover of the folder. "Marcus is a liar. He is a phenomenal, highly practiced liar. But numbers do not lie, Malik. DNA does not lie. Read it." Malik stepped forward, his dark eyes locked onto the unmarked folder. He reached out and flipped the heavy cover open. I stood silently beside him, watching his brilliant analytical mind process the information at lightning speed. He bypassed the summary pages and went straight for the raw data, just as I had taught him to do with any financial prospectus. He reviewed the offshore routing numbers, the Cayman Islands holding accounts, and the specific wire transfers. He saw the exact $50,000 discrepancy I had challenged Marcus about earlier that day. He traced the digital footprint directly to the exclusive boutique jeweler in Paris. Then he turned the page to the medical laboratory letterhead. I watched his eyes scan the black text. I watched him read the comparative genetic analysis matching his own medical profile to the DNA extracted from the lipstick-stained crystal champagne glass. I watched his gaze drop to the bottom of the page, locking onto the name printed in bold black ink. Sarah, his uncle Jamal's wife. 99.9% probability of maternity. Malik stopped breathing. His entire body went remarkably still. He did not gasp. He did not cry. The sheer magnitude of the deception hit him with the force of a freight train, but he absorbed the impact with terrifying stoicism. He looked at the financial ledger again, mapping the dates of Marcus's offshore transfers. He realized that Marcus had been funding Sarah's lavish lifestyle for years, buying her designer clothes, custom jewelry, and private vacations. He picked up the heavy manila folder and slammed it down onto the glass desk. The sharp, violent crack echoed through the silent study. He used me as a shield to fund his mistress right under your nose, and that woman dumped me on you so she would be free to seduce Uncle Jamal. Malik demanded, his voice vibrating with a lethal cold fury. Mom, we are going to make them bleed every single cent. I looked at my son, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of pride. He had instantly grasped the entire twisted architecture of their betrayal. Sarah had not abandoned him because she was a desperate drug addict. She had handed her newborn baby over to Marcus and me so she could maintain her flawless figure, erase her youthful mistakes, and expertly position herself to marry Jamal. She wanted the extreme wealth and social status of this family without any of the actual maternal responsibilities. Marcus had played the role of the noble patriarch, taking in an abandoned child while secretly using that child as a permanent, unbreakable tether to his brother's wife. They think they are completely untouchable, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Marcus believes his position at the bank and his real estate portfolio make him a god in this city. He thinks I am nothing but a glorified accountant. Sarah thinks she has secured the ultimate prize. They are arrogant, sloppy, and entirely convinced of their own superiority. Malik looked down at his desk, his eyes landing on the crumpled startup documents. He reached out and slowly began smoothing the wrinkled pages, flattening the crisp paper against the cold glass. The dark fury in his eyes began to shift, transforming into a sharp, calculating, predatory gleam. He possessed Marcus's physical height, but he had inherited my ruthless strategic patience. Marcus has been pressuring me for months to let him be the lead angel investor for my new tech firm. Malik said, his voice dropping into a smooth, businesslike cadence. He hates that I secured outside venture capital. He wants to control my board seats. He wants to slap his name on my press releases and play the proud, visionary father funding his son's brilliant future. I have been fighting him on it, wanting to keep my equity clean. Malik looked up at me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. I am going to pivot, Malik announced, smoothing out the final page of the contract. I am going to play the grateful, submissive son. I will go to his office tomorrow and tell him he was right. I will tell him I want to keep the success in the family. I will let him fund the entire seed round. I will let him think he has completely bought my loyalty and secured his absolute control over my future. I crossed my arms, studying the architecture of his idea. A standard seed round investment will barely make a dent in his personal liquidity, Malik. We need him completely overleveraged. We need him totally exposed. Exactly, Malik agreed, his eyes shining with cold, brilliant malice. That is why we are going to structure the investment as a massive, highly toxic bridge loan. I will tell him my firm needs double the capital to secure proprietary servers and international licensing before our major launch next quarter. I will make the projected returns look so incredibly astronomical that his greed will completely override his basic risk assessment. He will want to fund the entire inflated amount himself to avoid splitting the equity with other investors. I stepped closer to the desk, looking down at the smoothed-out documents. But Marcus does not have that kind of liquid cash readily available without liquidating his long-term assets, which triggers massive capital gains taxes, I pointed out. He will have to secure an aggressive private loan to fund your inflated seed round. And that is where you come in, Mom, Malik said, sliding the contract toward me. Your real estate fund operates a shadow venture capital arm through that holding company in Delaware. Marcus does not know the corporate structure of your secondary LLCs because his ego never allowed him to actually read your quarterly prospectus. You are going to be his secret lender. The brilliance of the trap washed over me. It was a masterpiece of financial destruction. We will use a proxy broker to offer him the bridge loan. I continued, my mind instantly drafting the legal mechanics. We will set the interest rate deceptively low, but the collateral requirements will be absolutely draconian. We will require him to personally guarantee the loan using his entire stock portfolio and his half of this exact Buckhead estate. We will bury a highly customized balloon payment clause deep within the financial covenants. Clause 4. Malik nodded, tapping his finger against the glass desk. A technical default trigger. We will link the balloon payment to a specific fluctuating market index. He will be so desperate to finalize the funding and lock me into his portfolio that he will sign the personal guarantees without having his own legal team do a thorough due diligence check. He thinks he is the smartest man in any room. He will never suspect his own son is handing him a live grenade. And when he inevitably misses that customized payment, due to the market fluctuation, I will execute the default clause immediately, I said, finishing the thought. I will legally seize his stocks. I will seize his equity in the house. I will completely liquidate his entire empire and leave him with absolutely nothing. We stood together in the quiet study, the blueprint of our revenge perfectly outlined between us. There would be no screaming matches. There would be no messy emotional confrontations or tearful ultimatums. We were going to dismantle Marcus and Sarah, surgically stripping away every single piece of wealth and power they valued. Malik picked up a premium silver pen and twirled it between his fingers, his dark eyes completely void of the boy he had been just an hour ago. He wants to play the generous, wealthy father, Malik whispered, his voice echoing with devastating finality. I am going to give him exactly what he wants. I am going to let him finance his own total destruction. The very next afternoon, the heavy air of the city felt thick with impending collision. Marcus had summoned Malik to the Capital City Club, an exclusive members-only establishment that reeked of aged mahogany, expensive cigars, and unchecked male privilege. It was exactly the kind of environment Marcus used to project ultimate authority. He sat at a private corner table in the dimly lit dining room, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit, projecting the image of a benevolent king, ready to bestow a kingdom upon his heir. Malik arrived precisely on time. He carried a sleek leather briefcase containing the final printed contracts. He wore a perfectly fitted charcoal suit, mirroring Marcus's corporate elegance, but internally his blood was running like ice water. Every time he looked at the man sitting across the table, all he could hear was the vicious echo of Marcus calling his biological mother a worthless street-walking junkie. Malik locked those emotions away behind a flawless mask of eager ambition. He played the role of the grateful son, stepping perfectly into the spotlight Marcus had arranged. "Sit down, my boy," Marcus said, gesturing grandly to the leather wingback chair opposite him. He did not bother to hide his smug satisfaction. He had spent the entire morning reviewing the term sheets Malik had emailed over. To Marcus, the bridge loan request was a stroke of absolute luck. He saw a desperate young entrepreneur asking for an enormous injection of capital to secure offshore servers and international licensing rights. But Marcus had no interest in server farms or tech licensing. He saw Malik's complex digital infrastructure as the ultimate high-volume washing machine. Marcus had a very specific, very urgent financial problem. Sarah had recently become relentless in her demands. She was tired of sneaking around expensive hotels and taking brief vacations under the guise of visiting friends. She wanted a permanent private sanctuary. She had found a secluded multi-million-dollar modern estate nestled deep in the heavily wooded hills just outside the city limits. The property was completely off the grid, heavily gated, and incredibly expensive. Marcus needed to move $2.5 million in cash to purchase the estate outright through a blind trust. He could not run that kind of massive transaction through his standard portfolios without triggering an immediate audit from his bank or raising catastrophic red flags with his own wife. Malik's startup, with its decentralized workforce and massive projected operating expenses, provided the perfect camouflage. Marcus planned to funnel the $2.5 million directly into the tech company's accounts under the guise of an angel investment. From there, he would manipulate the ledgers, forcing the company to pay exorbitant phantom invoices to a network of dummy offshore contractors. Those contractors were actually shell companies controlled entirely by Marcus. The money would be successfully laundered, emerging perfectly clean on the other side, ready to purchase Sarah's secret mansion. He was going to use his son's dream as a criminal vehicle to house his mistress. I read over the term sheets. Marcus began leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished table. It is an aggressive valuation, Malik. You are asking for a massive bridge loan to cover these initial international expansion costs. Most traditional venture capitalists would laugh you out of the boardroom for demanding this much capital up front without sacrificing a controlling equity stake. Malik kept his posture perfectly submissive. He looked down at the table, projecting the exact amount of engineered desperation. I know it is a heavy ask, he replied, keeping his voice tight. But if we do not secure the offshore licensing now, a competitor will beat us to market. The projected returns over the next 2 quarters will easily cover the aggressive interest rates. I want to keep the equity clean. I want to keep the success in the family. Marcus smiled, a wide, predatory grin. He reached out and clapped a heavy hand onto Malik's shoulder, squeezing it with mock affection. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. You have my business sense running through your veins. You understand loyalty. I am going to fund the entire round myself. I will provide the bridge loan through my private accounts. We bypass the banks, we bypass the venture vultures, and we keep the power exactly where it belongs. Marcus leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. His eyes darted around the quiet dining room, ensuring no one was within earshot. He squeezed Malik's shoulder tighter, attempting to forge an unbreakable masculine bond. Do not tell your mother, Maya, about the mechanics of this loan, Marcus instructed, his tone dripping with patronizing arrogance. She is a brilliant woman, but she gets overly cautious. She obsesses over standard procedures and tedious compliance rules. Women do not understand the fast, aggressive business of the men in this family. They lack the stomach for real risk. You and I, we know how to move mountains. Sign the papers, Malik. I will secure your future, and we will build an empire together. The sheer, unadulterated misogyny made Malik's stomach turn. The man was sitting there casually degrading the woman who had actually raised him, the woman whose brilliant financial mind had structured this exact trap. Malik did not flinch. He did not let a single fraction of his disgust show on his face. He simply nodded, pulling the thick leather binder from his briefcase and sliding it across the polished wooden table. I had my team print and bind the final courtesy copies this morning, Malik said, opening the binder to the signature pages. It saves your assistant the trouble. Everything is exactly as we discussed. Marcus did not even bother to read the dense legal text. His ego was entirely too massive. He believed he was the ultimate predator in the room, manipulating a naive young boy. He pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from his breast pocket and began signing his name across the designated lines. He had absolutely no idea that the document resting under his expensive pen had been meticulously intercepted and altered just 5 hours earlier. At 6 in the morning, Malik had sat in a secure conference room with Maya and her team of ruthless corporate litigators. They had taken the digital draft Marcus had approved and executed a flawless tactical swap. They did not touch the investment amounts. They did not touch the repayment schedules. They focused entirely on the labyrinth of financial covenants buried deep within the contract. Specifically, they targeted a dense block of text on page 48. Maya's lead attorney had utilized a microscopic legal font to completely rewrite the default acceleration triggers. The new clause explicitly stated that the lender holding the note was not a standard corporate entity, but a proxy trust entirely controlled by Maya. More importantly, the micro-font clause waived Marcus's right to any arbitration or grace periods. It dictated that if the tech company failed to meet a specific artificially inflated revenue target, the bridge loan would immediately default. Upon default, Marcus was completely stripped of his corporate asset protection. The clause made him personally liable for the entire debt, granting the proxy lender immediate irrevocable power of attorney over his entire personal stock portfolio and his controlling half of the Buckhead estate. Marcus was currently signing away the exact assets he valued more than human life. There you go, son, Marcus said, capping his gold pen and sliding the heavy binder back across the table. 2.5 million will be wired into your corporate accounts by the end of the business day. We are officially in business together. Malik looked down at the fresh, wet ink securing the trap. He closed the leather binder with a sharp, definitive snap. He looked up at Marcus, allowing a slow, cold smile to finally reach his eyes. Yes, we are, Malik replied, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that Marcus completely failed to recognize. We are going to change everything. The morning after Malik secured Marcus's signature, the atmosphere inside the sleek downtown offices of Vanguard Legal was charged with lethal anticipation. I sat across from DeAndre Washington, a corporate litigator whose reputation for ruthlessness was only matched by his immaculate tailoring. DeAndre was not just my attorney, he was the architect of my most complex acquisitions. He reviewed the signed bridge loan agreement Malik had delivered, sliding his manicured finger over the microscopic clause on page 48. A slow, appreciative smile spread across DeAndre's face. He closed the heavy leather binder and leaned back in his ergonomic chair, interlacing his fingers. This is brilliant, Maya, DeAndre said, his voice a rich baritone resonating with professional admiration. The boy executed the play flawlessly. Marcus signed away his primary asset protection without a single question. But a bridge loan default is a civil matter. It requires time litigation and a grace period for asset seizure. You want something faster. You want a guillotine. I want a poison pill. I corrected, meeting his sharp gaze. Marcus thinks he is using Malik's company to launder money to buy a mansion for his mistress. He is going to move the cash from his liquid accounts to Malik's corporate ledger, and then attempt to route it through a dummy vendor to close on Sarah's property. I need a mechanism that instantly criminalizes that transaction and triggers an automatic corporate forfeiture. I want his shares in the parent bank. DeAndre nodded, pulling a fresh file from his desk drawer. He had anticipated my exact request. He opened the file to reveal a highly classified corporate restructuring document. As a senior executive and board member of the bank, Marcus was bound by a strict fiduciary morality clause. DeAndre had spent the entire weekend weaponizing it. We used the morality clause combined with the collateral agreements from the bridge loan, DeAndre explained, sliding the documents toward me. We establish a shadow holding company in your name. We insert a trigger mechanism tied directly to the bank's internal compliance software. If Marcus transfers funds exceeding $1 million to an unverified third-party vendor while simultaneously leveraging his bank shares as collateral for a private bridge loan, it flags as severe financial misconduct. It triggers an automatic forfeiture. He tapped a specific paragraph highlighted in red. The poison pill activates the exact second the money hits the dummy account, DeAndre continued. By using the bridge loan to finance a secret real estate transaction for a hidden dependent, he violates Section 4 of his executive charter. The bank's bylaws clearly state that any executive caught embezzling or hiding assets immediately forfeits their vested shares to their primary secured creditor. In this case, the primary secured creditor holding his personal guarantees is you. I read through the legal jargon, absorbing the lethal perfection of the trap. It was airtight. Marcus was completely insulated by his own arrogance. He had spent his entire career manipulating the system, believing the rules applied only to his subordinates. He would never anticipate a compliance trap engineered by his own wife and executed by his own attorney. You are planting a time bomb under his executive chair, DeAndre said, a cold smirk breaking through his professional demeanor. The moment he transfers the money to Sarah, this contract strips him of everything he owns. He will lose his shares, his board seat, his reputation, and his fortune in a single automated keystroke. He will not even see the blade drop, I replied, signing the authorization forms to establish the shadow holding company. We are turning his massive ego into his own executioner. Send the compliance update to his administrative assistant. Bury it in the standard quarterly policy renewals. He never reads them. He always uses his digital stamp to approve standard compliance forms. Consider it done, DeAndre said, gathering the signed documents and sliding them into a secure lockbox. The infrastructure is in place, Maya. We just need him to push the button. Later that same afternoon, the heavy air inside Marcus's Buckhead home office felt thick with deceitful victory. Marcus sat behind his mahogany desk, completely alone, wrapped in a false sense of absolute invincibility. He had spent the morning finalizing the complex web of shell companies required to secure Sarah's hidden estate. The property was a stunning architectural masterpiece secluded in the hills, an expensive monument to his own vanity and his illicit affair. He believed he had played the situation perfectly. He had pacified me with his aggressive defensive posturing. He had secured his son's loyalty and his tech company's financial infrastructure with the bridge loan. He was entirely convinced that he was the grand puppet master, orchestrating the lives of everyone around him. Marcus unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out his secure banking token. He logged into his primary executive terminal, bypassing the standard security protocols using his high-level administrative clearance. The glowing blue screen illuminated his handsome, arrogant face. He opened the private offshore account he used to fund his illicit activities. He pulled up the wiring instructions for the dummy vendor account Malik had supposedly established for international licensing. In reality, that vendor account was a heavily monitored honeypot, entirely controlled by Tariq and DeAndre. Marcus typed in the recipient details, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. He did not feel a single ounce of guilt. He did not consider the devastating betrayal he was committing against his family. He only thought about the thrill of the secret, the power of maintaining a beautiful mistress, and the sheer satisfaction of pulling off a massive financial deception right under my nose. He reached the transfer amount field. He typed a 2 followed by 6 zeros, $2 million, the initial down payment required to secure the deed to Sarah's hidden sanctuary. The screen prompted him for a final confirmation. A small digital warning box appeared reminding him of the bank's standard compliance and fiduciary duties. It was the exact updated policy DeAndre had buried in his morning emails. Marcus did not even bother to read the warning. He scoffed, rolling his eyes at the tedious corporate bureaucracy. He was a senior partner. He was untouchable. With a swift, decisive motion, Marcus pressed the enter key. The screen flashed green. Transfer successful. Marcus leaned back in his heavy leather chair, letting out a long, satisfied sigh. He picked up his crystal glass and took a slow, celebratory sip of his expensive scotch. He believed he had just successfully laundered $2 million and secured his secret future. He had absolutely no idea that deep within the bank's digital infrastructure, a silent alarm had just been tripped. The automated compliance software instantly flagged the unverified transfer. The bridge loan covenants interlocked with his morality clause, activating the hidden triggers with flawless mechanical precision. The automated forfeiture protocols engaged, routing his entire portfolio of vested bank shares directly toward my shadow holding company. Marcus took another sip of his scotch, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire empire was currently burning to the ground. The bomb had officially been activated. The silent digital alarm triggering the destruction of Marcus's financial empire was completely undetectable to the woman sitting on the sun-drenched terrace of the Piedmont Driving Club. Sarah adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and took a slow, delicate sip of her peach mimosa. She felt utterly invincible. Her burner phone, tucked discreetly inside her quilted leather handbag, had just vibrated with a cryptic confirmation text from Marcus. The $2 million transfer was complete. Her secret, secluded mansion in the hills was finally secured. She was practically vibrating with a toxic mixture of greed and triumph. She had just one more minor detail to handle to ensure her new kingdom remained absolutely protected. She needed to secure the total loyalty of the pawn they were using to move the money. She needed to manipulate Malik. Malik walked onto this terrace precisely 10 minutes later. He looked every inch the exhausted, overwhelmed young tech founder. He wore a crisp, white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, projecting an air of youthful corporate anxiety. He scanned the tables, spotted Sarah, and immediately arranged his features into a mask of polite, familial submission. It took every ounce of rigorous psychological training he had absorbed from Maya to prevent his hands from balling into fists. He was walking toward the woman who had birthed him, abandoned him to a fake narrative, and was currently plotting to steal his adoptive mother's wealth. Sarah waved him over, flashing a brilliant, perfectly white smile. "Malik, my favorite nephew," she purred, leaning forward to offer a hollow, theatrical kiss on his cheek. "You look so tired, sweetheart. You are working entirely too hard on this new company." Malik took the seat opposite her, resting his phone face down on the wrought iron table. "It is a lot of pressure, Aunt Sarah," he said, keeping his voice appropriately strained. "The bridge loan with Dad is finalizing today. It is a massive step. I just want to make sure I am doing the right thing for the company and the family." Sarah signaled the waiter for another round of drinks, projecting the aura of a benevolent, wealthy confidant. "That is exactly why I asked you to meet me for lunch, Malik." She leaned forward, lowering her voice into a tone of manufactured intimacy. The heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone caught the midday sun. It was the exact necklace Marcus had purchased with the stolen $50,000. Malik recognized it instantly. He stared at the glittering stones, fighting the sudden violent urge to rip it from her throat. "Your father tells me everything." Sarah continued, her voice smooth and conspiratorial. "He is so incredibly proud of you, Malik. He believes in your vision, and he is willing to risk his own capital to ensure you succeed. He is a good man protecting his blood. But we need to have a very difficult, very adult conversation about Maya." Malik blinked, forcing his face to remain blank. "What about Mom?" he asked intentionally, using the word to gauge her reaction. Sarah let out a soft, patronizing sigh. She reached across the table and placed her manicured hand over his, giving it a gentle squeeze. Her touch felt like crawling insects against his skin, but he did not pull away. "You know I love Maya." Sarah lied flawlessly, her eyes swimming with fake sympathy. "We all do. But she is a corporate machine, Malik. She is a brilliant accountant, but she is incredibly cold. She only sees spreadsheets and liability margins. She does not see family. You have to understand, she lacks that natural maternal instinct. She did not give birth to you. She does not possess that inherent unconditional bond that a real mother has with her child." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of her words hit Malik with a physical force. The woman sitting across from him, the woman lecturing him about natural maternal instincts and unconditional bonds, had literally handed him over as a newborn infant so she could maintain her figure, cover up an affair, and marry a wealthier man. She was a living, breathing parasite masquerading as a caring aunt. The irony was so overwhelmingly sick that Malik actually had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. "She obsesses over this money," Sarah continued, entirely unaware of the lethal calculations running through the mind of the boy sitting across from her. "If Maya finds out about the sheer volume of capital your father is moving into your startup, she will try to control it. She will try to audit your ledgers and restrict your operational freedom. She will strangle your company before it even gets off the ground because she is deeply insecure and needs to control every penny in that house." Malik looked down at the table, playing the part of the conflicted, hesitant son perfectly. "Are you saying I should lock her out of the company financials?" "I am saying you need to be smart," Sarah replied, her voice hardening into a sharp, commanding edge. "You need to protect your assets, Malik. Your father is taking a massive risk to fund your dream. You need to return that loyalty by keeping Maya entirely out of the loop. Do not let her see your corporate accounts. Do not let her review the vendor transfers. Trust your father. He knows exactly how to move the money and take care of the people who truly matter. You need to protect yourself from that vicious stepmother of yours before she tries to take what is rightfully yours." Malik slowly raised his head. He looked directly into Sarah's eyes. He saw the naked, greedy ambition lurking just beneath her perfect makeup. She truly believed she had won. She believed she had successfully driven a wedge between him and the only mother who had ever actually loved him. She thought she was a master manipulator, effortlessly arranging the pieces on the board to secure her secret mansion and her illicit lifestyle. "You are absolutely right, Aunt Sarah," Malik said, his voice smooth, steady, and deeply convincing. "I really need to protect my future. I cannot let anyone interfere with the capital Dad is transferring. I will make sure Dad handles all the vendor routing personally. Maya will not see a single ledger. Sarah beamed, leaning back in her chair with a deep sigh of utter satisfaction. She raised her mimosa glass in a silent, celebratory toast. You are a smart boy, Malik. I always felt a very special, unique bond with you. I just want to see you protected. Malik smiled back. It was a terrifying mirror image of Maya's cold, predatory grin, though Sarah was entirely too self-absorbed to notice the danger lurking in his expression. I appreciate that more than you know, he replied politely. The waiter arrived with their food, breaking the conspiratorial tension. Sarah immediately launched into a superficial complaint about the country club's menu, completely shifting gears now that she believed her objective was secured. She chattered mindlessly about an upcoming charity gala and her plans for a summer wardrobe update. Malik sat quietly nodding at appropriate intervals, projecting the image of a calm, compliant nephew. He reached down to his lap where his right hand had been resting out of sight beneath the edge of the wrought iron table. His fingers brushed against the smooth glass screen of his phone. The device had been actively running a high-definition voice recording application since the exact moment he sat down. The microphone had captured every single word of Sarah's vile, hypocritical speech. It had recorded her actively advising him to hide corporate assets, instructing him to freeze Maya out of the financials, and explicitly admitting her knowledge of Marcus's massive capital transfers. With a swift, practiced motion of his thumb, Malik stopped the recording. He tapped the share icon, attached the audio file to a secure encrypted message, and selected Maya's contact profile. He pressed send. The digital progress bar zipped across the screen, confirming the delivery of the lethal audio file directly to Maya's private server. Malik picked up his water glass and took a slow, refreshing sip. Sarah was sitting right in front of him, cutting into her expensive salad, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just willingly handed over the final piece of digital evidence required to permanently destroy her entire life. The trap was no longer just set, it was inescapable. Less than 24 hours after that recorded lunch, the absolute height of Sarah's unchecked arrogance manifested inside the walls of my own home. I was in my upstairs study reviewing the audio file Malik had sent me when I heard the sharp, authoritative click of designer heels echoing across the Italian marble of the grand foyer. I did not rush downstairs. I took my time securing my iPad and walking to the second-floor landing. I looked down over the curved mahogany banister and watched a masterclass in sheer delusion unfold. Sarah was pacing through my primary living room, acting entirely like the lady of the manor. She wore a tailored white crepe dress that screamed newly acquired wealth, waving her hands and issuing rapid-fire directives to my household staff. Marcus was standing near the fireplace, holding a tumbler of bourbon, watching her with a sickening expression of indulgent amusement. He had invited his brother's wife into our home under the flimsy guise of discussing a charity gala, but they were operating with the brazen comfort of a married couple. "Take that down," Sarah commanded, pointing a manicured finger at the massive, vibrant canvas hanging above the custom velvet sofa. It was a commissioned piece by a renowned contemporary African-American artist, depicting a powerful matriarchal figure. It was the focal point of the room, and my absolute favorite piece in our entire collection. My head housekeeper Maria stood frozen, holding a dusting cloth, completely unsure of how to navigate the bizarre demand. Sarah sighed loudly, an exaggerated sound of profound impatience. "Did you hear me? I said take it down. The feng shui is entirely wrong for Marcus's energy. It is far too aggressive and the color palette completely clashes with the imported rugs. We need something softer here, something more refined." I descended the sweeping staircase, my footsteps intentionally silent. I walked into the living room, keeping my expression perfectly serene. Maria looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, silently begging for an intervention. I gave her a microscopic nod, dismissing her from the room. She hurried out, leaving me alone with the two people who were actively planning my financial execution. Sarah turned, sensing my presence. She did not look embarrassed. She did not offer a polite apology for overstepping her bounds. She simply offered a tight, predatory smile, her eyes scanning my simple, tailored trousers and silk blouse with distinct pity. "Maya, darling." Sarah purred, stepping closer to Marcus and resting her hand lightly against the sleeve of his suit jacket. "I was just telling Marcus that this room needs a complete aesthetic overhaul. The energy is so heavy. You really must learn to let the space breathe." I looked at her hand resting on my husband's arm. Then I looked at Marcus. He took a sip of his bourbon, completely unapologetic. He enjoyed this. He loved the toxic dynamic of having two women in the same room vying for his territory. It fed his monstrous ego. "I think the art is perfectly placed," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of any defensive anger. "It anchors the room." Marcus let out a short, patronizing scoff. He walked over to Sarah, validating her brazen intrusion by standing shoulder to shoulder with her. "Sarah understands Western art better than you," Maya Marcus said, his tone dripping with absolute condescension. He looked at the painting I had spent months acquiring and dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Stop acting superior with your cheap street art. We are hosting the regional bank executives here next month, and the house needs to reflect a certain pedigree. Sarah has a fantastic eye for these things. You should take notes." The sheer audacity of the insult hung in the quiet air of the living room. He was standing in the house my financial acumen had paid for, defending a woman who had abandoned his child, insulting my intelligence, and parading his infidelity right in front of my face. A lesser woman would have screamed. A lesser woman would have thrown her wedding ring, slapped him across the face, and demanded Sarah leave the property. But I was not a lesser woman. I was an apex predator holding the detonation codes to their entire universe. I did not raise my voice. I did not glare. I offered them the exact reaction they expected from a submissive, defeated wife. I offered them total compliance. "You are right," I said, allowing my shoulders to drop just a fraction to sell the performance. "I suppose I have been too focused on the corporate accounts to pay attention to the interior design trends. If Sarah believes the painting disrupts the flow, we can have it moved to the storage vault tomorrow." Sarah's eyes widened in brief shock before morphing into a look of absolute triumph. She exchanged a victorious glance with Marcus. They had successfully dominated me in my own territory. They had pushed the boundary and I had completely folded. Their arrogance swelled, filling the room like a noxious gas. "Let us sit down," I offered, gesturing toward the seating area. I walked over to the antique silver tea service resting on the side console. I lifted the heavy silver pot, pouring a perfect cup of Earl Grey. I placed it on a delicate porcelain saucer, walked back across the room, and handed it directly to Sarah. I served my husband's mistress tea in my own living room. "Oh, thank you, Maya," Sarah said, taking the cup with a smug, self-satisfied grin. She crossed her legs, settling into the expensive velvet sofa, as if she had already signed the deed to the estate. "You really do make a wonderful hostess." I took a seat in the leather wingback chair adjacent to them, resting my iPad on my lap. I unlocked the screen using my fingerprint, keeping the device angled away from their line of sight. Marcus and Sarah immediately fell into a relaxed conversation about their upcoming country club engagements, completely ignoring me. They believed I had been thoroughly neutralized. They thought I was a harmless, glorified accountant fetching their beverages while they plotted their future. Beneath the sleek glass of my tablet, the dashboard of my shadow-holding company was actively running. While Sarah drank her tea and laughed at Marcus's jokes, I opened a highly classified dossier compiled by Tariq. Sarah's lavish lifestyle was not funded entirely by her husband Jamal or her secret allowances from Marcus. She operated a chain of high-end boutique fashion stores across the city. The stores projected an image of massive success, but Tariq's forensic accounting had revealed the brutal truth. Sarah's boutiques were hemorrhaging cash. She had over-leveraged the company to sustain her own personal spending, taking out massive high-interest commercial loans from secondary lenders to keep the doors open. She was drowning in toxic debt, and the primary note holders were preparing to initiate aggressive collection protocols. I opened the secure trading portal linked to Vanguard Legal. DeAndre had spent the morning negotiating with those secondary lenders. They were thrilled to offload Sarah's toxic debt for pennies on the dollar. I looked up at Sarah. She was adjusting her diamond necklace, laughing loudly at a story Marcus was telling about a recent board meeting. She looked so incredibly secure, so certain that she was the smartest woman in the room. I looked down at the screen. The acquisition contracts were fully loaded. I was purchasing the entirety of Sarah's commercial debt. I was acquiring the promissory notes, the vendor liens, and the commercial leases for every single one of her boutiques. By executing this trade, I was officially stepping in as her sole primary creditor. When the poison pill activated and Marcus was stripped of his assets, he would no longer be able to funnel cash to her. Jamal would inevitably discover the affair and freeze her marital accounts. She would turn to her boutiques for survival, only to find that I owned every single outstanding note. I was going to financially choke her out of existence without ever leaving my chair. Marcus reached over and poured himself another measure of bourbon, his eyes locked onto Sarah with greedy affection. I tapped the screen, bringing up the final authorization prompt. The prompt required a single touch to initiate the massive capital transfer from my private reserve to absorb Sarah's debt portfolio. I took a slow breath, enjoying the quiet, magnificent power of the moment. I looked at the two traders sitting on my sofa, basking in the warmth of their impending doom. I pressed the enter key. The digital confirmation flashed across my screen, absolute and irreversible. I locked the iPad and took a serene sip of my Earl Grey tea. Marcus and Sarah continued their vapid conversation about country club politics, completely blind to the invisible noose I had just tightened around Sarah's neck. I excused myself shortly after citing a mild headache, leaving them to enjoy the illusion of their absolute dominance. I needed them comfortable. I needed them reckless. Over the next 72 hours, Marcus's recklessness mutated into sheer, unadulterated greed. The $2 million he had already siphoned through Malik's startup to secure Sarah's hidden estate was not enough for his grand exit strategy. Marcus was planning a complete scorched earth departure. He intended to detonate his marriage, abandon his corporate responsibilities, and vanish into a life of unchecked luxury. But true vanishing required untraceable liquid cash. Malik caught the audio the following Tuesday evening. Ever since the revelation in my study, Malik had taken it upon himself to turn Marcus's paranoia against him. Marcus was notoriously secretive about his private home office, often locking the door and taking calls on an unregistered burner phone. He believed his analog methods made him immune to digital surveillance. He vastly underestimated the technical prowess of a furious, brilliant software engineer. Malik had quietly installed a microacoustic transmitter behind the heavy mahogany bookshelves, perfectly positioned to capture every word spoken in the room. I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of sparkling water when Malik walked in. His face was a mask of cold, sculpted stone. He did not say a word. He simply placed his phone on the marble island and pressed play. The audio quality was pristine. I could hear the clinking of ice in Marcus's bourbon glass, followed by the familiar, arrogant cadence of his voice. He was on the phone with Sarah. The paperwork is finalizing tomorrow morning. Marcus's recorded voice echoed through the quiet kitchen. $5 million in raw, untethered cash. It bypasses the standard bank underwriters entirely. These private equity lenders are greedy and fast. They do not care about board approvals or marital consent waivers as long as the collateral is solid. I heard Sarah's voice, tinny and distorted through the phone speaker, but unmistakably giddy. Are you sure Maya will not find out about the lien on the house? She treats that Buckhead estate like it is her personal palace. Marcus let out a cruel, rumbling laugh. Maya is completely blind. I forged her signature on the spousal consent forms 3 days ago. By the time the primary mortgage holder flags the secondary lien, we will be long gone. When I kick her out, she will be breaking her back paying the debt for her stupid nest. We will be in Aspen sipping champagne while she begs the bank for an extension. The recording clicked off. Malik looked up at me, his dark eyes burning with a lethal protective fury. He is trying to steal your home, Mom, Malik said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. He leveraged the entire Buckhead estate to a shadow lending firm called Obsidian Financial. He took out a $5 million hard money loan with a predatory interest rate. He plans to wire the cash to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands right after my official company launch event next week. He thinks he is leaving you destitute and trapped under a mountain of fraudulent debt. I looked at my brilliant, fiercely loyal son. I reached out and rested my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension vibrating through his tailored suit jacket. He was ready to go to war for me. He was ready to tear his biological father apart with his bare hands. I turned away from the counter, walked over to my leather tote bag, and pulled out my laptop. I opened it on the kitchen island right next to Malik's phone. Marcus is a man who relies entirely on his own perceived superiority, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. He believes private equity operates in a lawless vacuum. He assumes that because a lending firm operates behind a veil of shell companies and proxy directors, it answers to no one. I typed my master administrative password into the Vanguard Legal Secure portal. I opened the master corporate registry for my real estate and investment empire. It was a sprawling, decentralized network of holding companies and secondary financial vehicles that I had meticulously built over 2 decades. I navigated to the Tier 3 subsidiaries. I clicked on a specific encrypted folder and turned the laptop screen toward Malik. Malik leaned forward, his eyes scanning the dense legal documentation. He read the articles of incorporation, the proxy assignments, and the ultimate beneficiary designations. His breath caught in his throat. He looked at the screen and then slowly looked up at me, a look of absolute profound awe washing over his face. Obsidian Financial. Malik whispered, reading the name of the parent holding company at the top of the ledger. Obsidian Financial is wholly owned by Vanguard Secondary Acquisitions. I offered a slow, razor-sharp smile, which is a direct subsidiary of my primary trust. Malik let out a short, breathless laugh, shaking his head as the full weight of the trap settled over him. He did not borrow money from a random shadow firm. He borrowed it from you. Precisely, I replied, closing the laptop with a soft, definitive click. Marcus was so desperate to secure fast cash without triggering a traditional bank audit that he blindly walked into the waiting arms of my own corporate predators. He handed over the deed to this house as collateral for a $5 million loan issued by my own company. The $5 million he thinks he is stealing is actually just being transferred from one of my corporate accounts to another. But the legally binding contract he signed is entirely real. The beauty of the execution was staggering. Marcus had forged my signature on the spousal consent forms, a federal crime, carrying severe mandatory prison time. He had pledged a marital asset he did not fully own to secure a massive loan under completely false pretenses. He believed he was pulling off the ultimate heist, leaving me to shoulder the devastating financial fallout. Instead, he had just voluntarily handed me a legally binding confession of grand larceny and wire fraud. The moment he attempts to move that $5 million to his Cayman account, the automated fraud protocols at Obsidian Financial will lock the transfer, I explained, mapping out the final stages of his destruction. The hard money contract he signed includes a strict non-transferability clause for offshore accounts. By attempting to wire the funds out of the country, he instantly defaults on the loan. And because he defaulted on a loan secured by forged documents, Malik added his analytical mind, instantly grasping the legal mechanics. You can execute an immediate foreclosure on his remaining assets while simultaneously handing him over to the federal authorities for criminal fraud. We are not just taking his money, Malik, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly calm register. We are taking his freedom. We stood together in the gleaming, pristine kitchen of the home Marcus mistakenly believed he had just stolen. The arrogance of the man was truly his fatal flaw. He had spent years treating me like a comfortable, predictable piece of furniture, completely ignoring the apex predator sleeping right beside him. He thought he was preparing a devastating surprise for me at Malik's upcoming launch event. He thought he would drop the ultimate bomb, leaving me shattered, humiliated, and bankrupt. He had absolutely no idea that every single step he took toward his grand escape was heavily monitored, perfectly anticipated, and entirely financed by the woman he intended to destroy. He had just mortgaged his own life, handing me the very chains I would use to bind him. The digital transfer cleared with a silent green flash on my screen. Sarah's entire financial existence now rested firmly in the palm of my hand. But a financial execution was only half of the equation. To truly dismantle the fortress of lies Marcus and Sarah had built, I needed to detonate their personal lives with the same absolute precision. I needed the final piece of the board to move under his own volition. I needed to activate Jamal. Jamal was a good man. He was Marcus's older brother, a dedicated cardiac surgeon who spent his days saving lives and his evenings providing Sarah with the opulent lifestyle she so desperately craved. He loved his wife with a blind, unyielding devotion. He trusted his brother implicitly. He was the perfect, unwitting shield for their affair, and it was time to tear that shield away. I was not going to tell him the truth directly. That would be too messy, too easily dismissed as the bitter ravings of a jealous wife. I needed Jamal to discover the betrayal himself so the realization would take root deep in his own mind. I knew his schedule meticulously. Every Thursday afternoon after his surgical rotations, he retreated to the quiet sanctuary of the Oak Room at the Piedmont Driving Club for a late lunch and a single glass of scotch. It was his weekly ritual to decompress. I arrived precisely at 2 o'clock carrying a thick leather folio bursting with printed real estate contracts and bank statements. I wore a tailored navy suit and an expression of manufactured corporate exhaustion. I spotted him sitting at his usual corner table overlooking the pristine 18th hole. He was reviewing a medical journal, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. I walked over, pasting a look of pleasant surprise onto my face. Jamal looked up and smiled warmly, offering a genuine greeting. "Maya," he said, standing up to offer a brief, polite hug. "What a pleasant surprise. Are you hiding from Marcus today?" I let out a soft, weary sigh, pulling out the chair opposite him. "I am hiding from the entire accounting department," I replied, resting my heavy leather folio on the polished mahogany table. "Marcus is on an absolute acquisition spree, and I am the one left drowning in the paperwork. I just needed a quiet place to review these new property deeds before the wire transfers clear tomorrow." Jamal chuckled, signaling the waiter to bring me a glass of sparkling water. My brother always did have a massive appetite for expansion. He is lucky to have a brilliant mind like yours managing the logistics. "I do not know how you keep track of it all. It is becoming incredibly complicated," I admitted, allowing a hint of genuine frustration to bleed into my voice. "Sometimes I think he signs these massive contracts without even reading the fine print." I unzipped the leather folio and pulled out a stack of documents. I shuffled through them, making a show of organizing the papers. I specifically maneuvered the heavily redacted thick parchment of the Obsidian Financial Loan Agreement toward the bottom, keeping the crisp white pages of the Aspen property deed right at the top. The deed was a masterpiece of legal documentation acquired by DeAndre earlier that week. It laid out the exact terms of the luxury mountain estate purchase, complete with the names of the primary title holders. I took a sip of my water, intentionally shifting my elbow so the top pages of the document slid across the smooth table directly into Jamal's line of sight. Jamal glanced down out of polite reflex. His eyes caught the bold black font at the top of the page. He froze. I watched the microscopic shift in his posture, the sudden stiffening of his shoulders. His eyes darted across the text, absorbing the staggering purchase price and the location of the property. Then his gaze locked onto the signatures at the bottom of the page. I pretended not to notice his sudden paralysis. I reached forward to gather the papers back into a neat stack. "Wait!" Jamal said, his voice suddenly tight and hollow. He reached out and placed his hand flat over the document, stopping me from moving it. "Maya, what is this?" I looked at him, blinking in feigned confusion. I looked down at the paper under his hand, and then let out a soft, nervous laugh as if I had just made a terrible social blunder. "Oh, I am so sorry, Jamal," I said quickly, pulling my hand back. "I thought this Aspen Villa purchase document was Marcus buying it for the family, but the CO owner is your wife, Sarah. Maybe Marcus wants to surprise you." The color drained from Jamal's face in a rapid, horrifying rush. He stared at the names printed side by side in cold, hard ink. Marcus Vance and Sarah Vance. Listed not as corporate entities, not as family trust representatives, but as joint independent co-owners of a multi-million-dollar secluded mountain estate. A surprise, Jamal repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. I leaned forward, my expression shifting into a mask of deep, genuine concern. Jamal, I am so sorry. I really assumed you knew. Marcus has been moving massive amounts of liquid capital all week. When I saw the deed cross my desk, I naturally assumed the two of you and Sarah were going in on a winter holiday property together. A joint family investment. You know how Marcus loves to orchestrate these grand gestures. Jamal slowly removed his hand from the paper. He looked up at me, and the expression in his eyes was utterly devastating. It was the look of a man watching his entire reality fracture into jagged pieces. The cognitive dissonance was tearing his mind apart. His brother and his wife secretly buying a hidden estate thousands of miles away using millions of dollars in untraceable cash. There was no innocent explanation for a secret joint real estate venture of this magnitude. There was no family surprise that required hidden signatures and shadow financing. He is moving capital, Jamal asked, his voice barely a whisper. Millions, I replied, keeping my tone apologetic and softly hesitant. It has been a logistical nightmare to underwrite. I just assumed Sarah had mentioned the Aspen project to you. She has such exquisite taste, I am sure she picked the property herself. I really should not have brought work to the table. Please pretend you did not see this. I would hate to ruin whatever grand reveal Marcus has planned for you. I reached out smoothly, collecting the Aspen deed and sliding it back into the depths of my leather folio. I zipped the case closed with a loud, definitive sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, suffocating silence of the oak room. Jamal sat perfectly still, his hands resting flat on his thighs. He was staring blindly out the window at the manicured golf course, but he was not seeing the grass or the trees. He was seeing the late nights Sarah claimed she was working on her boutique inventory. He was seeing the hushed phone calls she took in the other room. He was seeing the expensive new jewelry she claimed were gifts from her vendors. The puzzle pieces were violently snapping together, forming a picture he could no longer deny. I stood up, picking up my folio. I smoothed the front of my suit jacket, projecting the aura of a busy woman completely oblivious to the radioactive bomb she had just dropped. I really should get back to the office, I said, offering him a sympathetic smile. I have hours of ledgers to review before the final wires go out tomorrow. Please tell Sarah I said hello, and seriously forget you saw that deed. Let Marcus have his moment. Jamal did not look up. He gave a stiff, mechanical nod, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered against his cheek. Take care, Maya, he said, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth. I turned and walked away, navigating the tables with practiced grace. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening at that corner table. As I stepped out of the dining room and into the grand marble hallway, I paused near a mirrored pillar, adjusting my collar. I glanced at the reflection behind me. Jamal was entirely alone at the table. His medical journal lay abandoned on the polished wood. He had pulled his phone from his breast pocket. He was not calling Sarah. He was not calling Marcus. He was scrolling furiously through his contacts, his thumb moving with frantic, desperate precision. His eyes were dark, lethal, and fully awake. He was dialing a number he had likely saved years ago for a completely different reason. A high-level private investigator, a man who specialized in tracking hidden assets and securing digital surveillance. The bait had been swallowed whole. The hook was set deep in his throat. Jamal was going to tear his own marriage apart, hunting for the truth, and in doing so, he was going to expose every single lie Marcus and Sarah had built. The storm had gathered all its components. The sky was turning black, and the first lightning strike was only hours away. The night of Malik's official company launch finally arrived, transforming the grand ballroom of the St. Regis into a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns. The room was packed with the exact audience Marcus had spent decades cultivating. Regional bank executives, prominent venture capitalists, elite politicians, and the highest tier of local society mingled under the glittering crystal chandeliers. Marcus stood near the center ice sculpture holding court. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, radiating the supreme, unwarranted confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully robbed a bank while smiling at the cameras. Sarah was hovering near his orbit, wearing a striking emerald silk gown that cost more than most cars. She kept shooting him secret conspiratorial glances, completely unaware that her husband Jamal was standing near the back exit, his face an unreadable mask of absolute cold fury. Jamal had received the full report from his private investigator 2 days prior. He knew everything. He knew about the hotel rooms, the burner phones, and the joint deed to the Aspen estate. He was a tightly coiled spring waiting for the right moment to snap. I stood near the front row of reserved tables holding a flute of vintage champagne. I wore a simple, elegant black velvet gown, letting the sheer power of my silence command the space around me. I caught Malik's eye as he stood backstage. I gave him a single approving nod. The lights dimmed, casting a dramatic hush over the hundreds of assembled guests. A spotlight hit the center of the stage as Malik walked out. He looked immaculate. He did not look like a nervous young tech founder. He looked like an apex predator stepping into his prime. He tapped the microphone. The sharp, amplified sound cut through the ballroom, demanding absolute attention. "Welcome, everyone," Malik began, his voice smooth, deep, and incredibly steady. "Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate the launch of a project I have poured my life into. Building a company from the ground up requires vision. It requires dedication. But most importantly, it requires capital and absolute trust." Polite applause rippled through the room. Marcus puffed out his chest, looking around at his colleagues with a smug, proprietary grin. He was ready to bask in the glow of his son's success before destroying his financial future. "I want to take a moment to specifically thank my father, Marcus Vance." Malik continued, gesturing toward where Marcus stood. The spotlight swung slightly, illuminating Marcus, who raised his whiskey glass in a grand, magnanimous salute. "My father stepped in when we needed a crucial bridge loan. He provided the necessary capital to ensure our servers could go live tonight. He told me that family always protects family. He told me to trust him." Marcus smiled wider, completely oblivious to the lethal edge creeping into Malik's tone. "But the tech industry is built on data," Malik said, his voice dropping into a colder, sharper register. "It is built on tracking every single action, every digital footprint, every hidden transaction. And when you build a system designed to track anomalies, you tend to notice when the anomalies are coming from inside your own house." The polite smiles in the audience began to falter. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt incredibly thick. Marcus lowered his glass, his brow furrowing in confusion. Malik did not look away from his father. He raised a small remote control in his right hand and clicked a button. The massive LED screens behind him, spanning the entire width of the stage, flashed brilliantly to life. The screens did not display a logo or a product demonstration. They displayed high-resolution, deeply detailed financial ledgers. Bank routing numbers, wire transfer confirmations, and heavily highlighted destination accounts glowed in stark white text against a black background. Marcus's face went completely slack. The smug arrogance was instantly wiped away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He recognized those ledgers immediately. 2 weeks ago, my father transferred a massive sum of capital into my startup. Malik announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings like a judge reading a death sentence. "But that money was never meant for server infrastructure. My company was simply used as a blind proxy, a money laundering vehicle, to siphon funds out of his own marital accounts and hide them from banking regulators." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and shocked whispers. The regional bank executives, the men Marcus relied on for his entire professional reputation, began staring at him with open disgust. Malik clicked the remote again. The screen shifted, displaying the deed to the Aspen property side by side with the wire transfer confirmation. "You transferred $2 million into Sarah's private offshore account from my startup," Malik said, pointing directly at Marcus. You used my name to buy a secret mountain estate with your brother's wife. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical heavy weight pressing down on the room. Sarah let out a sharp, strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, her emerald gown swishing against the marble floor. She looked frantically toward the back of the room, searching for Jamal. Jamal simply stepped out of the shadows. He did not look angry. He looked entirely dead inside, staring at Sarah with a level of cold detachment that was far more terrifying than rage. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, realizing her entire world had just instantly evaporated. Marcus was shaking. He looked like a man who had stepped on a landmine and was just waiting for the click. Malik, stop. Marcus stammered, taking a half step toward the stage, his voice cracking with panic. You do not understand what you are doing. Turn that off right now. I know exactly what I am doing, Malik replied, his tone completely devoid of mercy. You thought you were the smartest man in the room. You thought you could use my company to commit federal wire fraud and leave my mother to shoulder the debt. You thought you were untouchable. Malik walked to the very edge of the stage, looming over his biological father. But you forgot to read the fine print on the investment contracts you signed. Malik said, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet pitch that somehow commanded the entire room. You were so eager to move the money you skipped the corporate compliance clauses. Malik clicked the remote one final time. A specific heavily magnified section of a legal contract appeared on the massive screens behind him. Clause 4 states clearly. Malik read aloud, looking down at the trembling man below him. Any act of embezzlement, fraud, or unauthorized diversion of funds by an investor automatically triggers a punitive forfeiture. Your entire equity stake, your personal bank shares, your voting rights, and your board seat immediately transfer to the primary executive officer of this holding company. Malik paused, letting the sheer magnitude of the trap settle over the silent, horrified crowd. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes, delivering the final killing blow. Which is me, Malik said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I now own every single share you possessed. I own your legacy. Thank you for the priceless graduation gift. The camera seemed to fast push directly into Marcus's face. The realization of his total, complete destruction hit him with the force of a freight train. He had not just lost his secret escape fund. He had lost his entire banking empire. He had lost his career, his reputation, and his freedom. He was entirely ruined, exposed as a fraud, a thief and a traitor in front of the most powerful people in the city. A primal, inhuman sound ripped from Marcus's throat. It was a roar of absolute pure desperation. His face contorted into a mask of violent rage. He dropped his whiskey glass, letting it shatter against the marble floor, and lunged forward, charging directly toward the stage with his fists clenched, ready to tear his own son apart. He never even made it to the first step. Two massive private security contractors, men built like brick walls, dressed in dark tactical suits, stepped seamlessly out from the shadows flanking the stage. They moved with terrifying precision. Before Marcus could even raise a hand, the first guard slammed his shoulder into Marcus's chest, halting his momentum instantly. The second guard grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it sharply behind his back and forcing him down to his knees on the hard floor. Marcus thrashed wildly, spitting curses and screaming Malik's name, but he was completely pinned. He looked up at the stage, his face red and slick with sweat. Malik did not flinch. He did not step back. He stood perfectly still, looking down at the pathetic broken man writhing on the floor. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, savoring the crisp, cold taste of absolute victory. The trap had snapped shut. The execution was flawless. The St. Regis ballroom was completely paralyzed. The only sound was Marcus gasping for air against the polished marble floor, his cheek pressed dangerously close to the jagged shards of his broken whiskey glass. I placed my champagne flute on the silver tray of a passing waiter who was standing frozen in shock. The delicate clink of the crystal was a sharp, distinct note in the dead silence. I stepped out from the front row of reserved tables and began my walk toward the stage. My black velvet gown absorbed the harsh light of the chandeliers, casting me as a dark, fluid shadow moving through a room of perfectly petrified statues. The regional bank executives, the venture capitalists, the politicians, every single person who had spent the last decade kissing Marcus's ring parted like the Red Sea to let me through. They recognized a slaughter when they saw one. They knew exactly who held the power in the room, and they were terrified of getting caught in the blast radius. I walked up the short flight of stairs to the stage, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing through the massive space. Malik stepped aside, offering me the center floor with a deep, respectful nod. I did not look at the crowd. I looked down at the man writhing uselessly in the iron grip of the tactical security guards. I carried a thick manila envelope in my left hand. I pulled the heavy stack of documents free, the crisp white pages stark against my dark dress. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed them casually onto the edge of the stage right in front of Marcus's face. The thick parchment slapped against the wood. "You really thought you had orchestrated the perfect crime, Marcus?" I said, my voice carrying through the microphone Malik had left active on the podium. It filled the cavernous room, calm and utterly ruthless. "You justified this entire wretched betrayal with a biological technicality. You whispered to Sarah in the dark that I was defective. You planned to kick me out of my own home, strip me of my dignity, and leave me destitute because I am infertile. Because I could not give you the biological heir you believed your massive, fragile ego required." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, a vein throbbing wildly in his neck. The audience let out a collective, synchronized gasp. The sheer personal cruelty of his motivation being broadcast to his peers was a social death sentence. "You thought your cruelty was a weapon." I continued pacing slowly along the edge of the stage. "It was just a blindfold. You were so blinded by your own arrogance that you mortgaged the very mansion my financial acumen paid for just to fund your pathetic escape. You took a $5 million hard money loan from Obsidian Financial thinking you could leave me buried under a mountain of fraudulent debt." I crouched down, bringing my face level with his. He was sweating profusely, his eyes wide and bloodshot, darting around like a cornered animal searching for an exit that did not exist. "Forgot to mention," I whispered, though the microphone picked up every single icy syllable. "Obsidian Financial belongs to me. It is a direct subsidiary of my private trust. You violated the credit agreement the exact second you attempted to wire those funds to your offshore shell account this afternoon. The loan defaulted automatically. The bank executed an immediate foreclosure on the collateral. I just bought my own house back at a private corporate auction for exactly $1. Marcus stopped struggling. His body went entirely limp against the marble. The absolute finality of his ruin crushed the remaining breath from his lungs. He stared at me with a look of hollow, devastating comprehension. He finally understood that he had never been the mastermind. He had been a puppet dancing on strings I had woven myself. "You own nothing, Marcus," I said, standing back up and looking down at him with absolute indifference. "You have no house. You have no banking empire. You have no equity. Your accounts are frozen and your legacy is entirely mine. But you do have visitors." I raised my hand and gestured gracefully toward the grand glass entrance doors at the back of the ballroom. Right on cue, red and blue emergency lights began to pulse fiercely against the frosted glass, illuminating the stunned faces of the guests standing near the foyer. The heavy wooden doors swung open, revealing a tactical team of federal agents stepping into the venue in synchronized formation. Their dark windbreakers bore the bold yellow letters of the FBI. "The FBI is waiting for you at the gate," I announced, my voice ringing with lethal authority. "Federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and forging a spousal signature on a commercial lien. You will not be going to Aspen, Marcus. You will be going to federal prison." The two private security guards hauled Marcus to his feet, dragging him roughly down the stairs toward the waiting federal agents. He did not fight back. He looked like an empty, hollow shell of a man entirely stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his future. The crowd parted again, watching in horrified fascination as the great Marcus Vance was marched out of his own gala in handcuffs. Near the back of the room, concealed by the heavy shadows of a towering floral arrangement, Sarah stood absolutely paralyzed, Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The emerald silk gown that had made her feel like a queen an hour ago now felt like a suffocating neon target. She watched Marcus being dragged away, and the true sheer scale of the danger crashed over her. Maya had orchestrated this entire collapse with terrifying precision. Maya knew everything. Maya owned the debt on Sarah's boutiques. Maya owned the house. Maya had trapped Marcus in a federal crime. Sarah was next. She knew she was next. Panic seized her throat. She could not breathe. She had to get out of the ballroom before Maya's cold, calculating gaze turned toward her. She had to run to her car, access her hidden emergency funds, and disappear before the financial guillotine dropped on her own neck. She took a slow, trembling step backward, slipping behind the heavy velvet drapes that lined the walls of the ballroom. The service corridor was just a few feet away. It was a dark, narrow hallway used by the catering staff leading directly to the underground parking garage. If she could just reach the elevator, she could escape the blast radius. Sarah spun around, lifting the hem of her expensive gown to sprint down the dimly lit exit hallway. She took 2 frantic steps forward. She slammed hard into a solid, unmoving wall of muscle and bone. The impact knocked the breath out of her, sending her stumbling backward. She let out a sharp gasp, looking up into the darkness of the corridor. The figure standing blocking her escape route did not move. He stepped forward into the dim light spilling from the ballroom entrance. The broad, familiar shoulders and the impeccably tailored charcoal suit belonged to her husband. Jamal stepped out of the shadows, and the ambient light caught the cold, dead expression on his face. He did not look like the gentle, dedicated surgeon who had spent the last decade treating Sarah like a fragile, precious jewel. He looked like an executioner. Sarah let out a strangled gasp, stumbling backward until her spine hit the heavy velvet drapes. "Jamal, please," she stammered, her hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "You scared me. I was just looking for the restroom. The crowd inside is just so overwhelming." Jamal did not say a word. He reached out, grabbing her firmly by the upper arm, and pulled her roughly back into the glaring light of the main ballroom. The sudden movement caught the attention of the remaining guests, who were still reeling from Marcus's spectacular arrest. The room, which had been filled with stunned murmurs, instantly fell into a breathless, expectant hush. Jamal dragged Sarah to the center of the floor, stopping just a few feet away from where Marcus was currently being held by the federal agents at the grand entrance. The FBI agents paused, allowing the final act of this domestic tragedy to play out. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick stack of glossy 8x10 photographs. With a swift, violent motion, he hurled them directly at Sarah's face. The heavy photos struck her chest and cascaded onto the polished marble floor. They scattered in a wide, humiliating circle for every socialite, banker, and politician in the room to see. They were high-resolution surveillance images. Marcus and Sarah entering a secluded boutique hotel, the two of them sharing an intimate candlelit dinner. A particularly damning shot of them kissing passionately on the balcony of a private resort. Sarah dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the photos, her perfectly manicured hands trembling so violently she kept dropping them. "Maya's legal team sent a courier to my office this afternoon." Jamal said, his voice projecting across the silent ballroom with the cold, clinical precision of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal disease. "They provided a very detailed, very thorough portfolio of your recreational activities. They also provided the financial paper trail mapping exactly how you and my brother plan to use my family name to fund your secret mountain getaway." "Jamal. Jamal, no, please," Sarah sobbed, crawling toward his polished shoes. "It meant nothing. It was a mistake. He manipulated me. You have to believe me." Jamal looked down at her with absolute disgust. He reached into his jacket one final time and produced a crisp, folded legal document. He dropped it on the floor right on top of the scattered photographs. "Those are your divorce papers," Jamal stated flatly. "And before you start calculating your alimony, you should know that Maya's corporate attorneys have already executed a freeze on every single account associated with your name. The boutique inventory, the offshore shell company, the joint accounts, all of it is locked down, pending a federal fraud investigation. You have absolutely nothing. Get out of my house empty-handed, you gold digger." The absolute brutality of the dismissal echoed through the high ceilings of the St. Regis. Sarah collapsed completely, curling into a pathetic, sobbing ball of green silk on the cold floor. She wailed, begging for pity, crying out for Jamal to listen to her, but he had already turned his back. He walked purposefully away from the wreckage of his marriage, disappearing into the crowd without a single backward glance. The ballroom descended into total pandemonium. The hushed whispers erupted into a cacophony of shocked exclamations. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside painted the room in chaotic strobes. Sirens wailed loudly, echoing through the glass doors, signaling the arrival of even more authorities to process the massive financial crime scene. At the entrance, Marcus watched his brother walk away. The final thread holding his sanity together simply snapped. He dropped to his knees, restrained by the federal agents, his head hanging in total defeat. He looked like a madman, muttering incoherently under his breath, entirely broken by the sheer magnitude of his absolute ruin. His empire was gone. His freedom was gone. His family was gone. I stood near the edge of the stage, watching the masterpiece I had orchestrated play out to its flawless conclusion. There was no sadness left in me. There was no anger. There was only the pristine, clarifying cold of absolute justice. Malik stepped down from the stage and walked over to me. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his expression radiating a quiet, fierce pride. He offered me his arm. I smiled a genuine, warm smile and looped my arm through his. "It is time to go home," I said softly. Together, my son and I turned toward the main exit. As we began to walk, the massive crowd of elite guests instantly parted. They stepped back, creating a wide, clear path for us to walk through. They lowered their eyes in a silent, profound display of respect and fear. They recognized the undisputed queen of the board. We walked down the center of the ballroom, the rhythmic sound of my heels echoing clearly over the chaotic noise of the police radios and Sarah's pathetic sobbing. When we reached the grand threshold, I paused. Marcus was kneeling on the floor, just a few feet away, surrounded by federal agents. He slowly lifted his head. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes hollow and devastated. He looked at me pleadingly, searching for any tiny shred of the woman who had quietly supported him for 2 decades. He found absolutely nothing. I reached over to my left hand. With a smooth, deliberate motion, I slid the heavy diamond wedding band off my ring finger. I held it up for a fraction of a second, letting it catch the flashing police lights. Then I dropped it. The ring hit the marble floor with a sharp metallic clink, bouncing once before rolling directly to stop at Marcus's bound feet. "Family is not defined by blood or lies," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal finality that cut straight to his soul. "It is defined by loyalty. And betrayal always comes with a very heavy price." I did not wait for a response. I did not need one. I tightened my grip on Malik's arm, and we walked out the grand doors, stepping into the cool, crisp night air. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind us, sealing Marcus inside the prison of his own making. The screen fades to black.